It's a weird feeling to sit through your own introduction. I feel, I don't know if, I don't know, I just don't know if I'll ever get used to it, but thank you so much. Thank you. It's just so great to be here with all of you today. I'm really excited to talk about the things that we're going to talk about. Without further ado, I'll just go ahead and share my screen, because if not, I'll just get to talking here and then we'll be behind and, you know, all of that. So let me start to share, and then I'm going to optimize it so that we'll be good. Okay, excellent. Is this good? Can everyone see? I can't really see, but let me know. I think I can open the chat and things if something is awry, but so thank you. So today the talk that I'm going to give is titled, it's not a talk actually, it's a workshop, but the workshop is titled Poetics of Survivorship, Imagining Black Queer Feminist Futures. As you know, I'm Megan, my pronouns are she, hers. I'm a poet, and I like to put this here just in this order, just because I think frequently, like when I'm doing like institutional work, I'm always like, I introduce myself as a professor first, just because I'm within the institution, but I think it's important to note that I personally identify as a poet first, an educator, sort of in addition to my poetry work. And so that's me. Before I get started, before I dive too deep, I want to open with a humble land acknowledgement. With gratitude and respect, I recognize and acknowledge that the land I live on is stolen land belonging to the Paugussett people. It's important to remember the violent histories of colonization, genocide, and forced removal of Native and Indigenous peoples from this particular territory and others, and to honor and respect the Indigenous people who were and are still connected to this land. I recognize the impacts of colonialism past and present and seek healing through this acknowledgement, reflection, decolonial praxis, and action. You can find out whose land you're living on if you don't know by visiting native-land.ca. And if you would like, we can sort of throw into the chat where you're calling in from. My goal in these virtual workshops is to try to make it feel as real as possible, as human as possible. And I think part of that is like being able to try to engage throughout. So feel free to use the chat throughout our time together to engage as well. Okay. And then my next little piece of information before we dive in is that throughout the workshop, we're going to encounter written and verbal descriptions of sexual violence, white supremacy, and queer and trans antagonism. Of course, please always take care of yourself as necessary. If you need to go off camera for a minute, if you need to leave altogether, do whatever you need to take care of yourself. I want to note that my intention here is the conversation is future thinking. It's bending towards like, what will the future look like? What would a future free of white supremacy perhaps look like? Can we imagine that, right? And so I hope that there are opportunities for uplift here. But of course, in imagining the future, we're always, of course, contending then with what is our present, what was our past, right? And so that's where we'll encounter some of these descriptions. So again, an attempt to make things human and an attempt to make things organic. This is kind of like the agenda, but like I'm open to flowing and seeing how, right, like if there's a poem or something that sticks out and folks are like really invested in talking about it, like I'm not like tied to this going this exact way. But just so we have an idea, I want to talk a little bit about like how I came to think about what I'm going to talk about in this way and sort of give you the guiding questions. Then I have a short opening prompt. And then I want us to look at a couple of pieces of writings. We'll look at poems sort of throughout this entire thing. But then I have these sort of sections where I want us to look at like how essays have been used, how folks have used the form of a collective statement or a manifesto, and then how those works and similar works have been anthologized and sort of curated and collected in particular ways. So we're going to kind of follow that sort of trajectory. And then I have a prompt that a sort of loose prompt that we'll be working towards and building on throughout the workshop. And then hopefully we'll have some time for folks to maybe share what they wrote or like what they've learned, and of course time for questions. Some notes before I jump in. First thing is, if you can, and I know that this is not possible for everyone, especially considering like your role at work, but if there are tabs on your computer that you feel like you can close right now that might be distracting, I would ask you to do that. Again, like in an attempt to make this more like what I've been doing. I'll take it out of that context. I'll just talk about myself. What I've been doing in virtual workshops is trying my best to close other tabs, and to maybe move my phone away from me and try to be as present as I would be if I was in a room in person doing a workshop, because it's so much easier to be pulled into so many different worlds. And so it's just something I ask you to consider. If it's possible, if it's impossible, please, don't do anything that you feel uncomfortable with, but just something to consider. And then this is maybe asking you to open a new tab, which is kind of contradictory, but I'm also going to ask that you grab a pen and a piece of paper or pencil, whatever you feel, your writing style, or if you'd like, you can open a new doc. If you have your phone and you feel more comfortable, you can open a notes doc on your phone. I have my journal here with me, my pen. So you're going to need that throughout our time together today. So just take a second to get that situated for yourself. And then lastly, I think, so I've been teaching online now, like so many folks, obviously we've all been like living in this virtual world, but I've been teaching online now for about a year, and I feel very comfortable with the technology stuff. So I hope that we don't have any trouble, but I'm asking that if there is trouble, that we just have grace and patience with one another as we navigate this. Okay. I guess I'll stop before I go into this slide and make sure that there are no questions or anything that's coming up. For me, just so you all know, what I see right now is just my slide. So I don't see myself, I don't see anything. So if there's something that like needs to be addressed, like if someone just jumps off of mute, I think that will be the most helpful way for me to understand that it's happening and respond to it. Okay, all good? So I was really excited about the opportunity to design something, to design this particular talk, because what follows is just, this is a thought project that I've been having since the pandemic started. Throughout, like, since the pandemic has started, there's been this call to artists and creatives to create, right, to make anew, to document the world that we're living in right now, which is absolutely a necessary component of how we archive and understand the past, which is true. But at the same time, and not just myself, so many artists and creatives have been pushing back and saying, but like, can we actually take a moment before we start to create brand new work? Can we take a moment to go back for a second, right? And think about what, in particular for Black folks, like what our ancestors have written and left over for us as gifts, right? I think of them as everything that we're going to talk about today as a gift that was left for us to engage with in moments like this. And so I was really excited to be able to put this together, because it's kind of the first time that I'm kind of cohesively charting out all of these thoughts that I have, and all of the work that's been speaking to me as we've been surviving, right? As I've been surviving the pandemic. And so my questions that I have are, how can we utilize these intergenerational Black feminist texts to imagine futures of repair, equity, and safety? What were folks thinking about in the early 70s and in the 80s and in the 90s about organizing, about being in community with one another, about addressing harm, right? And how can we use that? How can we rely on that to build the future that we want to live in? And then also, the other question that I have is, how have Black, queer, and trans people throughout time used the written word in a variety of genres and formats to push back against systems of violence and to imagine alternative futures? And like I said, sort of in the agenda, we're going to look at like all of these different modalities of communication that folks are using to again, to imagine a different world, and to also name and speak back to the systems of violence that are that the future would change. My last note before we really dive in is just this. The point of this workshop is supposed to be an opportunity for you to feel connected. You don't have to be a poet or a writer or an artist to, I hope, to enjoy this workshop, or to get something out of the workshop. I really hope that you can just listen to the words, right? Like if you're a person who, for whatever reason, throughout your life maybe was pushed away from poetry or pushed away from creativity in this sort of format, like I would just want to encourage you and invite you in to really just listen, to connect, to feel what resonates with you. There's not a right way to understand some of the work that we're reading, right? Like your feelings are your feelings as they come up. And so I just want to put that out there, because I think sometimes there's this like anxiety around engaging with poetry, particularly like if you're not a poet or not a person who reads poetry regularly. And I want to try to start to destabilize that. And that's the work that I try to do in my everyday life. And I would like to do that for you all here. Okay, so hopefully you have your documents open or you have your notebook. This is my opening prompt. So I want you to think about your tiniest treasure, the smallest, or it doesn't have to be the smallest, but something that you own that is small in size, but it means a lot to you. It has emotional significance to you. Typically, I think the go-to for folks is like a piece of jewelry, right? A ring or a necklace or a pair of earrings or something like that. But I want to, that's totally okay if that's your thing. And then also I want to encourage you to also think about what other small, tiny treasures you might have that you might be sort of glossing over because the wedding ring was the first thing that came up maybe. So your tiniest treasure. So once you have that in your mind, I want you to describe the tiniest treasure. And throughout all of the exercises that I'm going to ask us to do, I want us to just use single words or simple phrases, just a single word. And we're going to kind of create what is called a word pool. I'm going to show you what it might look like or what it could possibly look like in just 1 second. But describe your tiniest treasure just using single word, simple phrases. You can think about the colors of the treasure. You can think about the texture, if it has a smell. Just to give you some ideas, like something you might have that's a tiny treasure is like a birthday card that one of my tiny treasures is a birthday card from my grandma, right? That I still have, right? And so the size of it, right, might not be as small as a ring or something like that, but it's a tiny thing that means so much. And so think about that tiny treasure. Think about the specifics of it. Don't name it, don't say what it is, but just give us some words, write down some words that describe it. You can even think about when you're holding it, what do you think of? So if I'm holding the birthday card from my grandma, maybe I hear my grandma laughing, right? Maybe I hear my grandma singing happy birthday. So what do you hear? What sounds come to mind when you're with this item, when you're near this item? And what feelings do you feel? Again, just in short, simple words. I'm gonna stop sharing this at this level really quick, just to show you what a word pool could look like. This is kind of, I was working on this to describe like a little locket that I have. But this, and it's important that I say that this is a technique that I learned from the poet Rachel McKibben. So it's not my own original technique, but it's since become a part of my own creative process, is just at the end of our time together, I hope that you have a series of words or phrases. So for example, this is a phrase, heart-shaped is a phrase, but I kind of separated them into their own words. So the goal is at the end, we're gonna have this list of words, and then I'll talk about what we're gonna do with the words when we get to that point. But throughout the workshop, as I'm saying, maybe reflect on this, or what does this mean to you? I just want you to be cataloging those in your word pool. Does that make sense? Again, I can't see anybody, so I don't know if there are head nods.
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
Okay, perfect, sweet. Okay, so let me get back here. So just take a minute to do that. I'm gonna start writing some of my own words, and we'll just take like 30 seconds or so, a minute, 30 seconds. Okay. If you need to write down a couple more words, that's okay. If you don't, if you're all set, that's okay too. So I'm just gonna go to the next slide. Okay, so I wanted to, speaking of, like, I ended not the prompt slide, but the slide before, talking about this is an invitation for you all to really think about feeling. And so I want to open with Lucille Clifton's poem, Won't You Celebrate With Me? I open with this poem because I think of it, and I've said this in many other like workshops that I've done where I've opened with this poem, is that I really do take it as ritual. I think of this poem as a sacred text, particularly like regarding like Black feminist thought. And I think that opening with it is, again, it's an invitation for us to, think about one another in a really particular way. So I'm going to share an audio recording of the poem. Again, and I think that when I use the word gifts and guides to talk about the work that we're going to engage with, I really genuinely mean that. I really think of them as something that was left for us.
This poem is
that was left for us to have and to hold and to cherish. So in the interest of time, I think I'm going to just start the poem a little bit deeper into it. But what she talks about at the beginning, and I think this link is in the document that we can share it at the end, so you can listen to the whole thing. But she talks about having this experience with a colleague, a white woman who was didn't know she could hear her, and it was just like, I don't know why she's even here. She doesn't belong here. And so she comes out with this poem.
On the day, and I thought she should be happy for me. Why isn't she happy for me? But then later I found this poem applies to so many people, so many things, and a way to the Poetry Center, even to all of us in our lives, when we have struggled, and some of us even struggle every day to try to be better than we are, you know. Anyway, this is my other anthem of a poem. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I don't know if, can we put the text of the poem in the chat? There's a link to it. So you can also read it in case you all didn't have that. But there's a lot to say about this poem, but what I would like us to do first is to just reflect on what it means to celebrate. And I would like you to use verbs to do that. So when you think of celebrate, my example here, to celebrate is to laugh. So then the word you would write down is laugh. To celebrate is to dance, right? And so the word you would write down is dance there. Okay. What we can use the chat too, but folks can also feel free to jump in. But can we talk about maybe what some verbs we would use to describe what it means to celebrate, or to define what it means to celebrate? What verbs did folks write down?
Joy.
What was that? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Joy.
Joy. Mm-hmm.
I wrote down connect.
Connect.
Smile.
Mm.
Acknowledge.
Mm.
Encourage.
Yeah.
Remember.
Experience.
Remember and experience. I heard both of those. Mm. I see here, exhale, eat, cheer. Great. Awesome. Thank you all for sharing those. And again, for any of these, if I forget to ask, or I'm kind of just like chugging along, like please always feel free to share, if like when you're reflecting, if there's a word that comes up for you that you feel resonates with you and you'd like to share it, please feel free to use the chat to do that. And also, what I want to encourage you to do throughout is, like, as we're encountering poems, and even on the slides, like where I'll have quotes, if there's a word that stands out to you, a word that like for some reason it just sparks something in you, write that word down. I do that all the time, like when I'm at like different workshops and things, and like someone uses the like really beautiful word that I hadn't heard in that particular like tone before, I just write that word down to keep, because it means something, right? You'll come back to it. So if there's a word that stands out to you, write that word down. If even the word celebrate, right? You can write that word down if it's something that stands out to you. Okay. So let's jump into essays. Before we do that, I just want to, because I'm going to be talking about Audre Lorde's essays, I just want to give a brief introduction to who she is, just because I find her work to be so foundational to all of the more contemporary work that I'm going to talk about later on. Audre Lorde calls herself a Black lesbian mother, warrior, poet. Really crucial to, again, foundational to the early formations of intersectionality or intersectional feminist theory, Black feminist theory, and was sort of course, naming intersectionality and using different terms and languages for intersectionality, of course, prior to the coining in the late 80s by Kimberly Crenshaw. And this, Audre Lorde says that my sexuality is part and parcel of who I am, and my poetry comes from the intersection of me and my worlds. And so I think when we're talking about imagining Black queer feminist futures, I think particularly in the poetics of that, and the poetics or the written expression of that, remembering that identity is crucial to the folks who are creating this work. So I want to just, it's hard because, right, this is such a short time, because like really, I mean, could talk about this stuff for days. I mean, there are conferences and conferences and conferences and archives and archives and archives dedicated to this. So it was really hard for me to think about, like, how do I cohesively sort of piece this together and talk about what I want to talk about. But of course, we don't have time to go into the entire essay. In the document that we'll distribute at the end, there will be links and stuff to the full works that I highly, highly recommend and can't recommend enough that you read. So what I just have are some quotes, some pieces that I wanted to share and talk about, like, how I think about this as connecting to thinking about the future and the importance of writing as a mode of expression and as a mode of imagination and of documenting our imagination. So in her essay, Poetry is Not a Luxury, she says, Audre Lorde writes, poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams toward survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. Poetry is the way we give name to the nameless so it can be thought. And so the bolded parts that I have in this sentence, again, as I've been, the work that I'm talking about here for the most part is work that I had read when I was so much younger, and of course had revisited in so many different capacities as I grew. But like, I'm looking at it most recently, again, throughout the pandemic, as what are they telling us about? What are they telling us about what it means to imagine the future? And so what I get from this quote is this line here: we predicate, poetry forms the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards survival and change. And that poetry, by putting a name to something, by using language, we can create ideas, right? And then if we can create these ideas, then we can have a more tangible action. Then we can actually build the future that we're interested in living in. And so writing both becomes a tool for survival as well as a tool for change. Later in the essay, she says, we can train ourselves to respect our feelings and to discipline or transpose those feelings into a language that matches those feelings so they can be shared. And where that language does not yet exist, it is our poetry which helps to fashion it. Poetry is not only dream or vision, it is the skeleton architecture of our lives. So I think what I take from here too, in the idea about imagining, or in the conversation about imagination, is that the work is not only about this imagination, this dream or this vision, but that also, again, it's about constructing a reality, constructing the architecture of our lives. And I think here is where she also starts to articulate the importance of sharing our work, which is why I also hope that when we get towards the end and we're able to share with one another, that folks feel comfortable and excited to do that a little bit, just because sharing becomes so central. And that comes up in this essay, the uses of the erotic. The erotic is power, which is another one of Lorde's important essays. Again, I would highly recommend that you read the whole thing. But she talks about in this essay the idea of sharing in very interesting ways, but in particular that, like, in doing that sharing, we're reclaiming our language, our history, our dancing, our loving, our work, and our lives. She says that the erotic is the bridge that connects the spiritual and the political. That the erotic is the bridge that connects the spiritual and the political, those physical, emotional, and psychic expressions of what is deepest and strongest within each of us being shared, the passions of love and its deepest meanings. In order to be utilized, our erotic feelings must be recognized. The need for sharing deep feeling is a human need. And so she goes on in this essay to talk, I mean, again, it's a full essay, and these are just small excerpts that I'm pulling for this particular purpose, but I think that what I take from this moment is, again, that the importance of sharing our stories, of being able to recognize the places where we connect and then the places where we have different experiences and how those experiences inform one another. And it's through sharing, it's through communicating these feelings, whether through, again, an essay or through a poem, or through conversation, through a collective statement, right? Whatever mode that we choose to do that, it's important that it's shared. And also with sharing, I think what we'll talk about sort of throughout is accessibility, right? Like, I think that in the work that we're engaging with too here, or the work that I'm engaging with rather, is work that I think is accessible to so many different people. And so that's why I said at the beginning, don't be intimidated by the poems, because there's something here for everyone, and you can pick things up as you're listening, right, intuitively, because I think that's the power of this work. And so I'd like for us to listen to Audrey Lord read her poem, A Woman Speaks. And so I'm going to play this. It will have the poem, the text of the poem, running along the side. And then if the link to the poem can also be put in the chat, that would be great, so folks can follow along as well, in whatever mode feels comfortable.
I've just returned from a feminist conference and book fair in London, where for a week, over and over again, I was brought or made very, very conscious of the ways in which Black women and white women do not hear each other. So yet again, this is an attempt. The title of this poem is A Woman Speaks. Moon-marked and touched by sun, my magic is unwritten, but when the sea turns back, it will leave my shape behind. I seek no favor untouched by blood, unrelenting as the curse of love, permanent as my errors or my pride. I do not mix love with pity, nor hate with scorn, and if you would know me, look into the entrails of Uranus where the restless oceans pound. I do not dwell within my birth, nor my divinities, who am ageless and half-grown, and still seeking my sisters in Dahomey. Witches wear me inside their coiled cloths, as our mothers did, mourning. I have been woman for a long time. Beware my smile. I am treacherous with old magic and the noon's new fury. With all your wide futures promised, I am woman and not white.
So the title of this poem is A Woman Speaks, and I wanted you all to take a moment to reflect on the poem itself first, and it's not written here, but reflect on the poem itself first, and what do you feel immediately after listening to that poem? What do you think? What are some words that are coming to mind, some thoughts, some emotions? And then in addition to that, I want you to reflect on, what does it feel like to speak your truth? So in situations where you've had to be honest about like your own feelings, about your experiences, what does it feel like to be able to do that? If you are able to do that, if you have been able to do that. Try to use words that evoke emotion maybe, or that allow us to think about the emotion behind it. So perhaps it feels blissful, I've suggested here, perhaps it feels daunting. What is that? Think about that. Okay. I don't want that to happen. Before I go into manifestos and collective statements, I just want to see if there are any like thoughts, reflections, anything folks want to offer to the group.
I said, thinking about to what you had stated and what we had to write down, it made me think about like being naked and being authentic. And that was like two words that stand out to me. And then it made me think about like how every day I try to speak my truth and I try to be unapologetically myself in the work that I do and the art that I create. So yeah, being naked all the time and being vulnerable and authentic.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think Audre Lorde's work certainly speaks to that in both of those essays and so much of what she's talking about, the vulnerability, and then also like the strength that maybe comes out of that too. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Okay. So folks, obviously feel free to continue to use the chat as well. And let's move into talking about the collective statements. I think so I'm trying to figure out what I want to say or what direction to go in, but something that I've been studying, I have this really cool opportunity to teach our senior capstone. So for like students in the WGSS program who are graduating this semester. And so it's a really unique class where I get to like design it all by myself, and there's no sort of topic except that like it should be a culminating class, which is just like very, very big and wide. And so part of what I was able to do was think about like, I'm also very interested in thinking about how folks have throughout time formed collectives and work in collectives, particularly, and again, this is not just me, there are so many folks doing so much impressive and astonishing work on this in other places. But what I've been really interested in is thinking about how people used to, or like have existed in collectives with one another, where of course, because anytime, right, people are in community with one another, there's the potential for harm. Right, and so I'm interested in thinking about like how did folks navigate that in their own collectives, right, from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. And so you can find both of these documents on the internet in a couple of different places, but the Black Women's Manifesto is it's a kind of like a zine, but it's composed of all these different essays and pieces reflecting on Black womanhood and Black women's experiences in the 60s and the 70s. So definitely access that. And I want to turn our attention to the Combahee River Collective Statement, which is published in 1977, but as a collective, they had been meeting for quite some time before then. And this is, again, one of those pieces of writing that throughout, excuse me, throughout my my life, my career, I don't know, my journey as a Black feminist, this is one of those pieces of work that I've accessed many, many times for many, right, like for many different assignments, right, across the board, can be used and utilized in so many different ways. And so of course, naturally in my thinking about thinking about the past and what folks did, I of course went to this collective statement. And so if you're unfamiliar with it, again, I'm recommending everything that I'm sharing with you here for you to go and read further and read more closely. But they are a collective of Black lesbian feminists who are organizing in the 70s and the 80s. And their statement becomes so formative and crucial to the formations of Black feminist thought, the formations, again, of intersectional theory, right? So I think it's important to note, in case it's not clear, that like, right, Kimberly Crenshaw coins intersectionality in the late 80s, but again, for decades, even before the 60s, folks, Black women were doing that work of naming intersectionality. And this is just one of those texts where we see that sort of laid out. But the statement is broken down into these 4 sections. One, it talks about the origins of contemporary Black feminism. They talk about their own beliefs as a collective. They talk about exactly what I'm interested in, like the problems of organizing Black feminists, including a brief history of their collective. And then they end with listing some of their core issues that they're going to focus on, and ideas for future practice. So it is, I mean, again, like I don't know what other word to use besides the gift. Is just like a gift of a text that gives us such a detailed look into again how collectives were forming. And again, this is, I mean, critical text, and cannot do it justice in the time that I have, but highly recommend you all spending some time reading it if you can. This is a quote from the collective statement. We realize that the only people who care enough about us to work consistently for our liberation are us. Our politics evolved from a healthy love for ourselves, our sisters, and our community, which allows us to work and continue our struggle and work. What I love and what I find so important about this particular moment is that the note, our politics evolve from a healthy love for ourselves, our sisters, and our community. I think that particularly like in this day and age, right, like I get, which I'm very fortunate for, but like, right, my job is really cool because I get paid to like talk about this stuff all the time, and just get to get paid to like teach people about this stuff, which is a dream come true for me. But particularly like, right, in a time where there are positions in which we're doing this work, right, which we should be compensated for, I think what's been important for me to remember is that like me coming into this work, me encountering this work, it stems from a love, right, for myself, for my community, for my sisters, for my siblings, right, for like siblings in terms of like folks who are in the movement, for my comrades, right, for my accomplices, right, like it's so, I think that like re-rooting ourselves in the idea that this is about a sort of radical love, which therefore is about a desire for longevity and a desire for the future to be a safer, more equitable place for everyone, right, is so essential, and has been so essential for me throughout this past year. And then later in the statement, they say, we reject pedestals, queenhood, and walking 10 paces behind. To be recognized as human, levelly human is enough. And I don't know, I can't be, I don't know, grateful enough or thankful enough for, I think the argument that I'm making is that like, had the women in the Combahee River Collective not written this down, right, had not been able to communicate this and leave it for us in a way that we could access it today on March 25th, 2021, right? What would we have, right? And so I think it just speaks to the importance of the written word as a survival technique as well, so that folks in the future can access it. And I think what's powerful, particularly about collective statements too, and manifestos, are that they, again, broaden it from like an individual sort of perspective, of course, right? Like, so because we're a collective, we're speaking, one, to a variety of experiences, and certainly not everyone's experience, but we have different voices who are at the table, who are documenting some of this stuff. And we're a united sort of, I don't want to use the word front, but like we're a united group. We're a group of people who are united in our ideas and our beliefs, and we are all committed to envisioning a different world. And so it's one thing to have your own dreams, but it's another thing to have a collective sort of dream, which I think is important about the collective statements and the manifestos. So I would like us to listen to June Jordan's poem about my rights. It's a bit of a longer poem. I think the playtime is about like 5.5 minutes, but I want to note that this poem, in the poem, she uses a bit more graphic descriptions. She talks explicitly about rape, and is also thinking about and talking about colonialism, genocide, violence, and things like that in this poem. And so it's a bit longer, but what I also want you to note in this poem, again, is like thinking about the words that stand out to you. Please try to think about that. And then also think about, if you're following along with the written text, look at the way that the poem is written, look at the way that the poem is structured, look at what's repeated in the poem. And so I don't want you to hold too much in your mind, because I also want you to be listening to the poem, but like, again, note what words you hear repeated and see if you can get those into your word pool if possible. So I'm going to share this poem, and then, yeah, hopefully we can get the text of it there too.
Poem about my rights. Even tonight, and I need to take a walk and clear my head about this poem about why I can't go out without changing my clothes, my shoes, my body posture, my gender identity, my age, my status as a woman alone in the evening, alone on the streets, alone not being the point being that I can't do what I want to do with my own body because I am the wrong sex, the wrong age, the wrong skin, and suppose it was not here in the city but down on the beach or far into the woods, and I wanted to go there by myself, thinking about God, or thinking about children, or thinking about the world, all of it disclosed by the stars and the silence. I could not go, and I could not think, and I could not stay there alone as I need to be alone, because I can't do what I want to do with my own body. And who in the hell set things up like this? And in France, they say, if the guy penetrates but does not ejaculate, then he did not rape me. And if after stabbing him, if after screams, if after begging the bastard, and if even after smashing a hammer to his head, if even after that, if he and his buddies after that, if he and his buddies and I consented, and there was no rape, because finally, you understand, finally they over because I was wrong. I was wrong again to be me being me where I was, wrong to be who I am, goddamned wrong, which is exactly like South Africa, penetrating, as it were, into Namibia, penetrating into Angola. And does that mean, how do you know if Pretoria ejaculates? What will the evidence look like? The proof of the monster jackboot ejaculation on black land. And if after Namibia, and if after Angola, and if after Zimbabwe, and if after all of my kin women resist even to self-immolation of the villages, and if after that, what will the big boys say? Will they claim my consent? Do you follow me? We are the wrong people of the wrong skin on the wrong continent, and what in the hell is everybody being reasonable about? According to the Times this week, back in 1966, the CIA decided that they had this problem, and the problem was a man named Nkrumah, so they killed him. And before that, it was Patrice Lumumba, and before that, it was my father on the campus of my Ivy League school, and my father afraid to walk into the cafeteria because he said he was wrong, the wrong age, the wrong skin, the wrong gender identity, and he was paying my tuition. And before that, it was my father saying I was wrong, saying that I should have been a boy because he wanted one, a boy, and that I should have been lighter skinned, and that I should have had straighter hair, and that I should not be so boy crazy, but instead I should just be one, a boy. And before that, it was my mother pleading plastic surgery for for my nose and braces for my teeth and telling me to let the books loose, let them loose. In other words, I am very familiar with the problems of the CIA and the problems of South Africa and the problems of Exxon Corporation and the problems of white America in general and the problems of the teachers and the preachers and the FBI and the social workers and my particular mom and dad. I am very familiar with the problems because the problems turn out to be me. I am the history of rape. I am the history of the rejection of who I am. I am the history of the terrorized incarceration of myself. I am the history of battery, assault, and limitless armies against whatever I want to do with my mind and my body and my soul. And whether it's about walking out at night, or whether it's about the love that I feel, or whether it's about the sanctity of my vagina, or the sanctity of my national boundaries, or the sanctity of my leaders, or the sanctity of each and every desire that I know from my personal and idiosyncratic and indisputably single and singular heart, I have been raped because I have been wrong. The wrong sex, the wrong age, the wrong skin, the wrong nose, the wrong hair, the wrong need, the wrong dream, the wrong geographic, the wrong sartorial I have been the meaning of rape. I have been the problem everyone seeks to eliminate by forced penetration with or without the evidence of slime. But let this be unmistakable. This poem is not consent. I do not consent to my mother, to my father, to the teachers, to the FBI, to South Africa, to Bedford-Stuy, to Park Avenue, to American Airlines, to the hard-on idlers on the corners, to the sneaky creeps in cars. I am not wrong. Wrong is not my name. My name is my own, my own, my own. And I can't tell you who the hell set things up like this, but I can tell you that from now on, my resistance, my simple and daily and nightly self-determination may very well cost you your life.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. I remember the time when the first time I heard this poem, and I was quite young. I was probably 19, and I think it's a long poem. Of course, we all just listened to it, but I think there was so much that came up for me when I heard this poem for the first time, that it wasn't until most recently, when I was going back to it again in this effort to understand and to ask questions and to hear and to listen to what was being said, that I really listened to those last couple of lines, that my resistance, my daily, I'm forgetting the exact words now. I have to look at the doc, or like the text of it. But it wasn't until recently, again, that I really started to look at those last few lines. But I can tell you that from now on, my resistance, my simple and daily and nightly self-determination. And I think there was so much, of course, that comes up in the beginning parts of the poem, that I hadn't even fully sat with those two specific lines, rather than like the overall sentiment of the end of the poem. But I think it's those lines have been the lines that have been sticking out to me. So I'm curious to hear what lines stood out to other folks' words or moments. We can use a chat, we can talk, whatever.
I like the way she used me being me where I was. I just found that to be powerful.
Yeah, thank you.
I liked how she repeated certain words, like wrong was a very powerful word because she turned it around. And then also the phrase, can't do what I want to do with my own body, stood out to me.
Yeah, Thank you so much. Yeah, wrong is like, it's such a central word to the poem too. And of course we get at the end here, I am not wrong. Wrong is not my name. I think of that line actually quite frequently. Wrong is definitely one of the words that I associate strongly with this poem. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Holly had said about that, and what Erica had said in the chat also, because being like a child of color, and especially a child of coming from a immigrant like families and everything like that, where they tell you everything that you do wrong and what you need to like do to like improve and everything like that, and like even if you do try, it's still like considered like wrong to them. So it's just like that really like resonated with me a lot.
Yeah.
Kind of triggering, but like, you know, like in a good way, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something powerful, and I think that's part of the power of poetry, about like being able to connect your own experiences and to like what's being said, right? And seeing yourself or seeing your experiences reflected there. So absolutely. Thank you. Okay.
Poem about.
Sorry. Keep pushing on. So this section is I don't have like particular quotes. I just have some more recommendations for sort of future reading if you want to think more, because I want us to have time to write as well. But I think it's important that it said that another method of survival is like, of course, writing the poems, the essays, the collective statements, whatever it may be. But also what does it mean to collect those and then put them in this a very accessible format, such as an anthology or a curated collection, right? And then also, what does that say? I think similar to the idea of the collective statement as being like, here we are as a group, I think an anthology also does that same sort of work of like, here we are, and here are all of these different people with all of these different experiences, touching on and thinking about all of these different topics and theories that connect and intersect, right? And so I think that there's something very, very powerful about that as well. And these are just a handful, so there's so many more, but if you're interested in learning more, or if you're interested in reading more, if you're just interested in thinking about a place where you can find some of this work in just one sort of place or a couple sort of places, I highly recommend this bridge called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color. I hope a lot of folks are familiar with this bridge, so that might be sort of a text that you're already familiar with. If you're interested in learning more about Black feminist studies, I would recommend All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, but Some of Us Are Brave, or The Words of Fire, an anthology of African-American feminist thought. It's also a strong anthology as well. Some more contemporary works, I would recommend the Crunk Feminist Collection. I would also highly, highly recommend, I've just started reading Octavia's Brood, but I would already highly recommend it. It's a collection of science fiction stories from the social justice movement, and it's edited in part by Adrienne Marie Brown, so highly recommend, and it has some of her work in there as well. And then most recently published is Brianna Jones's anthology of Black lesbian thought called Mouths of Rain. It just came out literally last month, February 2021. And I'm waiting on my copy, so I also highly recommend this as well. Again, just like places where you can find the types of imaginative and thoughtful work in these sort of centralized local places. And lastly, so this was like, I was trying to, let me just show you. So, I was like, what books am I reading? So I got all the books that I'm reading, and then I was like, what book should I recommend out of the books that I'm reading? And I'm a person who reads a lot of books at the same time, and then because I read for a lot of different purposes, like I read to read along with my students, so my class type reading, I read for like work and research, I read for like poetry, like for work poetry, and then for fun poetry. So I'm always reading a lot of different things, and I think that, like I said, I've been doing this, so I was trying to figure out what to bring, and I just had to bring everything up, but I'm not going to go through everything. I'm just going to talk about a few. I guess what I will say is for Audre Lorde, I would recommend her book Sister Outsider. It has all of the essays, both of the essays that I talked about, and a bunch more. I would also, and I'll put these on the document too, because I didn't write these down because I didn't know which ones to put in. But I'll put all of these on the document. But I would recommend Sister Outsider. A book that I'm reading now that I think is super important is Sadia Hartman's book, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments. Talk about thinking about the past, right? So what she does in this text is she goes into the archives and writes these really beautiful, imaginative stories that she calls them intimate histories of riotous Black girls, troublesome women, and queer radicals. And so it's a fascinating, it's just fascinating. It's a fascinating piece of work. And so I highly recommend it. But really what I think in terms of like, when I think of my own mini project of going into the past, and then I look at like Sadia Hartman's work of really, really going into the past and going into the archives, I think that I find connections between that in the sense of like, the idea that like when we go back there's something to be learned and there's something that we can take with us about ideas on how to survive. So Sadia Hartman, I'll list her work. And then I guess for my last, well, I'll do a poetry recommendation too, but for my second to last recommendation, I would recommend Adrienne Marie Brown's We Will Not Cancel Us and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice. You can purchase this book from AK Press, which is an independent and anarchist publisher. But it's a little booklet and it includes her important blog post from last summer about cancel culture in the age of COVID-19. And it's really, again, thinking about how do we imagine a different world and how do we engage with ideas of transformative justice when we're working in collectives where again, when we're in community, harm can happen. How do we do that work and how do we dream up these worlds? So highly recommend this one. And then for my poetry, I have so many poetry books, but for my poetry recommendation, I will do this because we're going to listen to one of Cameron Awkward-Rich's poems. And so I would recommend Cameron Awkward-Rich's book, Dispatch. With that being said, I think that actually goes nicely into, I would like us to start 10. I'm going to read a poem too, but I would like us to lead into our workshop by listening to Cameron Awkward-Rich's poem, Cento, Between the Ending and the End. A cento is a poem that is comprised of other people's lines. So it's already a poem that is in conversation with other people. And in that way, it also reminds me of sort of a collective statement. And so in this poem, Cameron Awkward-Rich is using his friend's work, who are other contemporary.
This is Cameron Awkward-Rich.
Who are other contemporary Black, queer, and trans poets. And so he's using their lines to construct this poem, which I think is also about, well, you'll see what it's about when we get into it, but I think the ending about being wild and sort of free is a beautiful sentiment to sort of lead us into the next part. So here is Cento, Between the Ending and the End.
Cento, Between the Ending and the End. Sometimes you don't die when you're supposed to, and now I have a choice. Repair a world or build a new one. Inside my body, a white door opens into a place queerly brimming gold light. So velvet gold is like the world hasn't happened. When I call out, all my friends are there. Everyone we love is still alive, gathered at the lakeside like constellations. My honeyed kin, honeyed light beneath the sky, a garden, blue stalks, white buds, the moon's marble glow, the fire, distant and flickering, the body whole, bright-winged, brimming with the hours of the day, beautiful, nameless planet. Oh, friends, my friends, bloom how you must, wild, until we are free.
So I want you to just hold his poem within you, and then I'm going to read you a poem of my own. And this poem is called "We Will Find an Island," and the only song that will play is the Whitney song that makes us cry. So I just have offered a picture of Gwendolyn Brooks and a picture of Whitney Houston here. But this poem is written in the style of a golden shovel. A golden shovel poem is a form that was created by poet Terrence Hayes, and based on, it originated with thinking about Gwendolyn Brooks's work. And Gwendolyn Brooks is, of course, like well, I hope most folks know who Gwendolyn Brooks is, but she's a poet. And so the golden shovel form is where you take a Gwendolyn Brooks line from a Gwendolyn Brooks poem, and you end your lines with the words of that line so that the endings would read as that line. So I'll show you when I show you my poem. And so I've decided to read this poem because I think just in terms of like the intergenerational sort of conversations, and then also I think in the poem I'm trying to imagine a new world. So you can find this poem online at Tinderbox Poetry Journal. So like I said, the golden shovel, the lines are kind of staggered in this poem, but the last words in the line are from Gwendolyn Brooks's poem, The Blackstone Rangers. So gang girls are sweet exotics here. And then the other lines are from Boy Breaking Glass. And that line is our beautiful flaw and terrible ornament. But I'll read the poem. We will find an island, and the only song that will play is the Whitney song that makes us cry. And we will name the island after the summer when the gonorrhea gang finally learned to stop kissing with their mouths open. When the girls who we were, with our amethyst bruises, turned violence, unbludgeoned by our blooming, are lipped in metallic blue and rimmed in black gossamer and hung with hoop earrings, our sweet names cursived between the bamboo gold. And on the island, we will be the exotics. We will be young and untouched, and they will crave our fat bodies, our bulging mouths, our sea salt and Creole, and we can say anything and be beautiful doing so. And on the island, anyone who loves us will be full of flower and flaw, and we will love them black, and we will kiss their palms, and we will decorate their faces with gemstones. And on the island, we will dance to the Whitney song that makes us cry. We will lilt a terrible dance beneath a quiet moon, and we will glow like some firelit and skybound balloon, some gorgeous and floating ornament. So I hope that your word pools are, I kind of stopped doing mine throughout, but I hope that you have been able to create an extensive word pool that you can pull from to do this writing prompt. I was going back and forth trying to make a writing prompt, and I kind of struggle with writing prompts because I feel like the professor side of me is like they have to be ultra specific or else, you know, all hell breaks loose, right? But then when you're doing a poetry writing prompt, like I want to be flexible and I want folks to have space to do it. So I was like, really, this took me like the longest time to just get these 4 lines because I was just like, I don't know what the writing prompt should be. But I hope that we can just rely on our word pools to write our own poem where we just imagine what our future would look like, the future that we want to have, what that would look like. And of course, I think that we can consider the COVID-19 pandemic in our imaginings as being something that is part of our past in a particular way, but also like that we don't forget about it, right? So, and also the pandemic's still here. So like, right, I think we can imagine a future that allows us to, that allows everyone, a lot of people, most people, everyone to access safety and to be liberated and to be free. And so what does that look like? Using the words that you've come up with, I hope that there's a balance of words in there that have positive connotations or that feel like strong, happy word. And I don't know if happy is the word, but like that feel like emotional words that you can use to imagine a better future. That's what I'm hoping for. And so just think about what we've talked about throughout, think about the poems that we've looked at, Try to be specific with your language, try to use specific details, images, emotions. You can rely on your own memories and your own experiences. You can write it as we see, we've listened to a couple of different poems, we've read a couple of different poems. They can look so different. So take a minute to maybe do that, and maybe I'll let you do that until 3:20. That gives us like 3 minutes, and then we'll have like 10 minutes to like chat and share and ask questions and things like that. Okay, so just another minute. Actually, while y'all are wrapping up, I think I'll just quickly finish up my slides so I can join you in the room. The last thing that I would just say here is that you can find me at my website, which is mcpowellpoet.com. You can find more of my work right here under the work section. But I just want to get out of, I want to stop sharing so I can join you all in the space. Okay. So you might not be done, and that's actually probably a good thing, because then hopefully you can return to it later on. But I think the last thing I'll say too is that one of my goals as an instructor and as a writer, as like a teaching and educating writer or whatever, is that my goal is always to hopefully help people deepen or establish a relationship to writing, because I don't think, you don't have to be a writer for like, for realsies. Like, you could just be a person who likes to write to help you to help you just even articulate some of your ideas. So that's always my goal. And it's funny because at work, because I'm a writer and a poet, then they let me teach like the writing intensive classes, and I'm like, my relationship to writing is not what you think it is. So my students are not writing essays, they're literally writing manifestos. So I think that like I hope that this at least allows you to think about, like, if you had any apprehension towards writing, that like hopefully this feels like maybe something you can incorporate into your everyday life or your weekly life, or occasionally when you have a spark of inspiration. But I'll leave it there. I would love to hear if folks would like to share anything, any takeaways, and if anyone has questions for me.
Are we sharing like our poem that we kind of wrote?
Yeah, yes, certainly. You can share a piece of it, a line from it, the whole thing, whatever you'd like.
Okay, I'll go. I'll jump
Yeah,
right in there.
and I would just, before you start, I don't want to cut you off, but if I would just let folks know if there's something we should, like if there's a content thing we should be aware of ahead of time, let folks know.
Yes and no. But if there is, feel free to take a safe space and take a moment for yourself. So I don't have a title to it, so I'm just gonna go with the flow. Okay. I forgot how to dance for 1 second. The silence in the streets. I can only taste the spirit of survival. So many bags of food. This time, I wasn't going to struggle to eat. Struggling to eat is not new. Not knowing if someone spat in your food because your skin color was as dark as the pan that they cooked with. Freedom was in this quarantine, not having to worry about the world in which was fear for unjustifiable reasons of racism, but more so fear for the world because we all feared that one thing as a collective. The sickness was crawling within.
Thank you so much for starting us off. I really appreciate that. That takes a lot too. So I'm just so thankful and appreciative of the opportunity to hear your words. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, reactions. Other folks feel excited to perhaps share some words, some reflections, and like I said, again, 2 questions, if there are questions.
I can share if everyone doesn't mind.
Yes, please.
Okay. Under the silver moon, we dance and smile, sharing our experience, acknowledging our daunting past, welcoming vulnerability, enveloping each other with a sense of heart-shaped security. We remember, we smile, we connect, we laugh, we acknowledge.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Again, it's not easy for anyone to share their work, so I really appreciate both of you being willing to do that. And again, the opportunity to hear some of what's in your heart and what you had an opportunity to write down. Thanks so much.
I can share as well.
Thanks.
Okay, so beginning tiny and soar, watch it grow, like the green earth that accepts, buries, survives. It is warm and safe. It's a place for celebration. Watch it climb through the gut-wrenching hell and icy fire, continues to grow until the tiny seedling gains its freedom. The need to grow remains, and the myriad of colors join and melt.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm loving these poems. I'm so happy that folks had an opportunity to do that. I love that. Thank you. I hope this felt, for folks too, like I said at the beginning, one of my objectives was to make this more human. And I hope that it felt like you could feel something. Sometimes we're numb on these things. I'm just I am zoomed out. So I hope that this gave me an opportunity to maybe feel a little bit better on a Zoom call.
I feel like this Zoom has been very connecting. I really appreciated it.
Thank you so much. I'm glad. Thank you. I'm happy. That's what I strive for. it's hard, you know, in this day and age, of course, like in the virtual world, I think. Well, if no one else wants to share, I just wanted to reiterate that we'll be sending out the document with like all of the readings that I brought up and some of the ones that I've suggested. I'm glad to, again, you can connect with me through my website. I think my stuff, like connection stuff is there, but I'm glad to, you know, I really do love to talk about this stuff, so I could talk about it forever and always. So please reach out if you have any thoughts or questions in the future. If you want to, like, you know, talk about poetry or whatever, please, I'm always down to do that. And I don't know, and just thank you for being here. I don't know what else needs to be said, but I just wanted to say thank you for being here. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mick. And I also, like, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this workshop is because, like, everyone here does a lot of heavy work all the time. And I hope that people have to, like, take a break from that and take pause and, like, just, like, connect with themselves and connect with kind of, like, the longer history and, like, the longer future that we're all hoping to build. So thank you, Mick. You are amazing, as always. I hopefully put in the link correctly. This is my first time doing a Zoom thing for the Alliance. I'm really hoping I didn't do any tech things wrong. So fill out the eval when you can, only take a minute, and we'll send out the list of poems and resources and everything that Mick shared with us. So thank you all. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Nani, and you did fabulous. Thank you for all of your help, for all of the links, for the music at the beginning. That was perfect. Everything.
Oh yeah, thank you for encouraging me to do that, because now I feel brave enough to do it for my other stuff.
That's what I mean, future thinking. We got to think about the future. So
you did it.
Thank you all so much. I'm so grateful. Seriously, thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.